She was just 12 years old, a yellow ribbon in her hair, a disposable camera swinging from her wrist. One second, she was smiling at her brother while taking pictures of lion tracks in the dust. The next, she was gone. No warning, no chance to react, just silence, and a ribbon left behind on the trail. For 6 years, her family searched across 2 continents. 6 winters in Denver passed with her bedroom untouched, her notebook open to the last page. And then, one ordinary evening, her mother turned on the television. What she saw froze her blood, because there, in the middle of a wildlife documentary filmed in South Africa, a teenage girl appeared, walking among lions as if she belonged to them. It was Sarah, the daughter they thought was gone forever. And what came next, no one could have imagined. But before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I read every comment, and I love seeing our community from all around the globe. The dust on the Kruger Road rose in soft veils as the sun shouldered up from the scrub. Acacia thorns combed the wind. In the open game viewer, a family of 4 sat hip to hip listening to the guide's radio crackle rumors of lions near the Sabi River. The air smelled of diesel and wild grass. Somewhere far off, a francolin burst into its tinny alarm and fell silent. Laura Bennett warmed her fingers on a thermos lid. John, her husband, adjusted a borrowed hat. Their son, Ethan, 16 and restless, filmed light flickering through leaves. Between them, 12-year-old Sarah held a disposable camera like a talisman. She'd begged for it at the camp shop before sunrise. 1 roll, the cashier had warned. Make every shot count. They pulled into a lookout where the world fell away to tawny grass and bleached stones. The Sabi ran low, its skin wrinkled with light. The ranger, Sifo, killed the engine. 15 minutes, only on the path, he said, tapping the painted post where yellow arrows pointed like rules you could hold. Sarah hopped down first. She framed Laura's profile against the river. She framed John pretending not to squint. She framed Ethan's dusty sneakers and the imprint they left, longer than hers, heavier. Save a few, Ethan teased. You'll run out before breakfast. I'm making them count, she said, crouching to photograph a chain of cat prints blurred by wind. Sifo's voice drifted over her shoulder, explaining how you can read a story in clay, rounded edges for unhurried steps, sharp edges for a sprint. In the road's shoulder, 4-toed signatures curved like commas, fresh, heavy, unhurried. Lions moving east. A gust carried the sweet rot of the river and the dry heat of something that had just passed. Sarah's skin prickled. She wore a thin yellow ribbon to keep her hair back. Laura tucked it behind her ear. Stay where I can see you, she said. Please. Here, Sarah answered, and took 2 steps toward the path. A small object flashed at her feet, a metal pendant stamped with a lion's head. She slipped it into her pocket without thinking. Make it count, she thought. Even souvenirs could be stories if you carried them right. John traced loops on the map. Skukuza Road after this, he murmured. Ethan rolled his eyes. Sifo listened to the radio with the patience of a man who knew the bush didn't care about itineraries. Sarah lifted the camera. Through cheap plastic and glass, the world held still. She exhaled and pressed the button. The shutter clicked, and the bush answered with a sound so faint she almost missed it. A stifled cry. Not an animal. Human, small, afraid. She pivoted. The path kinked into shade, then brightened again 20 steps away. Somewhere beyond that second pool of light, the sound came again, swallowed and released by grass. She looked toward her mother, about to call out. 2 figures detached themselves from the thorny screen as if the branches had learned to walk. A cloth smell, sweat, old smoke, reached her before their hands did. Fingers closed around her wrist. The camera bumped her ribs. Shh, a voice breathed in accented English. No noise. Sarah inhaled to scream. The yellow ribbon lifted. Light flashed off a chipped ring on the man's knuckle, blue enamel shaped like a drop. On the lookout, Laura turned at the same instant and saw only the ribbon floating for a heartbeat, then falling. Down by the river, the vultures tightened their circles. Sipho's radio hissed once, sharply, and then the world went very, very still. The wind shifted. Dust lifted off the path in small spirals and settled again, erasing shallow prints as if the morning were already trying to rewrite itself. Before the African sun, there had been Denver snow, sidewalks lined with bare cottonwoods, and the long shadow of the Rockies across the Bennett's brick house. In Sarah's room, the walls were a quilt of taped-up photos, porch-sitting gray cats, the neighbor's mail truck in January slush, her mother's hands holding a chipped mug. She photographed ordinary things because ordinary things stayed. "To hold still what runs away," she'd say when Ethan teased her. She was 12 and small enough to tuck her knees into the kitchen chair. "Eat your eggs," Laura would say. "Photographers need fuel." Laura taught 9th grade English and kept her hair clipped short so chalk wouldn't find it. When she was nervous, she quoted lines under her breath. Sarah knew them now and repeated them like handrails. John, who designed steel trusses and spoke in sketches, loved differently, quiet, practical. He came home with rolled blueprints and set rules. "Cameras stay in cases when we travel," he'd say. He meant it until he saw Sarah's face outside the Kruger camp shop at 5:08 a.m., all light and urgency. He bought the disposable camera anyway. "Make every shot count," he told her, fisherman proud, as if handing over a net. Ethan, 16, and lately allergic to being told, loved in motion. He drummed beats on the table, talked about learning to drive, joked too loud when he didn't want to talk at all. He called Sarah Professor when she over-explained. She called him Captain Obvious when he under-listened. Their fights were small and quick, smoke more than flame. But some nights Ethan would knock on her door and ask to play cards until both were too tired to keep score. The safari had been Laura's idea. "Before high school swallows us," she said, smiling in the way that made John flinch because he knew time had a mouth. They flew to Johannesburg, then east to the park, and the minute the gate swung open, the sky seemed to widen into something with no ceiling. Sarah wrote the names she learned in a spiral notebook: Marula, Euphorbia, Nyala. Sipho, their guide, taught the rest. "You read the bush the way your mother reads poems," he told her. "Everything leaves a line." "You just decide which ones matter," Sarah decided. The notebook lived in her back pocket. The camera hung from her wrist by a plastic strap. The yellow ribbon was a concession to Laura, who said the wind would tangle her hair into a bird's nest otherwise. There were fragilities she carried and didn't say aloud, that loud places made her throat close, that she counted doorways to walk through them. In Kruger, those oddities felt like tools. Counting kept you alive. Noticing kept you from stepping where you shouldn't. The lion pendant she'd pocketed that morning was cool against her palm. She didn't tell anyone. It felt like a secret breadcrumb. On the back, a single initial scratched in, a crooked S that could have been anyone's. She turned it with her thumb and promised to photograph it later on the camp's concrete stoop, fever tree shadow crossing its bronze face. "Hey, Professor," Ethan said, as the truck bumped over washboard dirt. "You going to take a picture of every rock in this country?" "Only the ones that look back," she said. It landed as a joke. It also wasn't one. At dusk the night before, the Bennetts watched elephants ghost between thorns, lifting and setting their feet like an idea, traveling from one mind to another. In the fading light, Sarah had whispered to Laura, "If I got lost, would you still know me?" Laura's hand found the hollow at the base of her daughter's neck. "Anywhere," she said. "Any amount of time." Sarah memorized the words in case she ever needed to play them back. Sipho told a story about getting turned around as a young ranger and following a flock of starlings back to the road. You don't always look for the big tracks, he said. Sometimes you look for what moves in crowds. Sarah pictured black clouds of birds, folding and unfolding like lungs, making maps in the air no paper could hold. Back at the lookout, a break in the breeze let the heat rise in a straight line. John folded the map and tapped the corner against his knee. 15 minutes, he repeated, as if repeating kept time obedient. Laura brushed dust from Sarah's shoulder. Ethan made a show of checking an empty signal bar. Sarah raised the camera. The world clicked into a small square with a bright center and dark corners. She tried to make the center hold. Later, when reporters asked Laura what the last thing she saw was, she would say, "Her ribbon." When they asked John, he would say, "Her left shoe turning, like she'd heard something I didn't." When they asked Ethan, his mouth would harden. "2 men," he'd answer, and the sound of the radio coming back to life too late. But for now there was only the click, the cry she almost didn't hear, and the part of Sarah that, even as fingers closed around her wrist, thought to press the camera to her belly to keep it from breaking. The pendant shifted in her pocket as if it, too, had a pulse. Somewhere beyond the path's bright bend, grass leaned and then held its breath. The grass closed behind Sarah and the men like a door. On the lookout, the ribbon fluttered once, twice, and then dropped into silence. Sifo scanned the clearing, nostrils wide. He knew what dust should smell like. This smelled of cloth and ash. Laura called her daughter's name once, then again, louder. Ethan felt his stomach knot, a reflex he couldn't name. John barked something about staying calm, his voice too loud for the hush. Minutes stretched. The truck engine ticked as it cooled. And then came the sound. Not Sarah's voice, not wholly human, something between sob and wail carried low through the Thornveld. A sound that made every vulture in the sky veer for a heartbeat. Sifo dropped from the truck and crouched. He pressed 2 fingers to the soil. Fresh prints, deep, hurried, adult men. Sarah's small shoe prints tangled with them, the line bent toward thicker bush. Laura moved as if to follow. Sifo's arm barred her chest. "No further?" he said. "Not yet." His eyes scanned east, then south. The radio hissed. A ranger's voice cut through. "Ioborhio." Movement by the old Marula stand. Possible contact. And then, over the radio's static, a new noise filtered through, faint, rhythmic, guttural. Not the crackle of man-made instruments. The sound of breath in unison. Lions, 3 of them pacing. Somewhere in the Thornveld, Sarah cried again. The cry ended not in silence, but in a deep rumble that shook the air itself. Sarah's world was narrowed to rough hands and the smell of leather. She stumbled, camera clutched to her ribs, the pendant's edge biting her palm through the pocket. The men muttered in quick tones she couldn't parse, pushing faster, pulling harder, and then everything stopped. The bush exhaled heat. From the scrub ahead, a shape detached, massive golden eyes amber in half-light. A lion, then another, and a third. The men froze. One spat a curse, another drew a knife that looked like a toy against what stood before them. The lions fanned out, shoulders low, tails stiff. Sarah's breath rattled. She expected claws, teeth, the ending her body braced for. But the lions did not pounce. They fixed their eyes not on Sarah, but on the men. The one with the knife stepped back. The second shouted. The third ran. The lions advanced with that slow, inexorable certainty of predators who knew fear when they smelled it. In seconds, the men scattered like quail, vanishing into brush. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing. The lions circled, not close enough to touch, but close enough to keep her in their orbit. One lay down, tail flicking dust. Another yawned, teeth like polished ivory. The third settled behind her, a sentinel. Hours blurred. When she cried, the lions shifted, ears tilting as if listening. When she stilled, they lay their heads down. No attack, no escape, just protection. When rangers reached the Marula stand that night, they found drag marks, a broken sandal strap, and claw imprints layered over human ones. No Sarah, no men, only the unmistakable print of 3 lions resting in a circle. Sifo knelt, touched the dirt, and whispered something no one caught. Laura fell to her knees. John looked away. Ethan pressed his palms to his eyes until he saw stars. The official report read, "Child taken, possible predators, evidence inconclusive." But in the dust, a disposable camera lay half-buried, its strap torn, one frame exposed, faint and blurry. Sarah's ribbon caught in a thorn branch, and behind it a shadow that was neither man nor bush. The Bennetts stayed in South Africa for 3 weeks after the disappearance. Days blurred into interviews, searches, and briefings that always ended the same: no body, no answers. Laura refused to leave the ranger station. She traced circles on a map retracing every report of movement. "She was here," she'd whisper, finger pressing into paper, "and then here." Rangers exchanged looks they thought she didn't see. John wrote emails at 3 a.m. to embassy staff, to NGOs, to anyone with an acronym that sounded official. He built towers of requests out of nothing but polite desperation. Each answer came back, no leads. Ethan sat apart, kicking gravel into lines, replaying the moment again and again, the ribbon lifting, the radio hissing, the gap where his sister should be. He didn't tell anyone that in the chaos he had seen 3 shapes move beyond the men. He wasn't sure if he believed it himself. Sifo more than once pressed Ethan's shoulder and said quietly, "The bush remembers more than we do. You saw something. Trust it." Police reports cited abduction. Locals whispered other things, that sometimes lions claimed the lost, not as prey but as kin. "Child's cry," one old ranger said. "They hear it. They guard it. Happens once in 1,000 years." Laura clung to it. "If anyone could live 6 days out there, it's Sarah," she told reporters. "She notices things. She counts them. She remembers them." But 6 days passed. Then 7. By the 10th, the case thinned into silence. The family was urged home. "Without remains," the officer said gently, "we cannot confirm." Back in Denver, winter pressed against the windows. Laura kept Sarah's room as it was. Camera posters, peeling, spiral notebook open to the last page. A sketch of a lion's paw print labeled "Unhurried." Years wore grooves into the family. John's hair silvered at the edges. Laura carried her daughter's pendant, mailed from South Africa, in an evidence envelope, as if warmth still clung to it. Ethan grew tall, sharp-shouldered, quiet. He stopped drawing attention in class and started watching instead, as if his sister's habit had passed to him. By 2018, 6 years had layered themselves like sediment. The Bennetts had learned to speak in half sentences, to end conversations before grief completed them, and then came the night that cracked everything open. Laura was grading essays with the television humming in the background. A wildlife documentary from the BBC, filmed in Kruger, filled the living room with golden light. She wasn't listening until a phrase hooked her ear. For 6 years, a pride has been observed behaving unusually, tolerating the presence of a young human among them. Laura froze. The screen showed lions sprawled in dusk, flies orbiting their eyes. Between 2 adults, a figure moved, slight, pale-skinned, barefoot. Hair tangled, eyes wary. Laura dropped her pen. The pendant slid from her lap onto the floor. "John!" she screamed. He came running, Ethan behind him, and there she was on the screen, older, thinner, but unmistakable. Sarah. They didn't breathe for the next 30 seconds of footage. The BBC narration glided over the image as if describing weather. Unusual tolerance, a subadult allowed within the pride's boundary. The camera drifted. A lion swatted at flies. The girl, older now, hair sun-bleached and feral, tilted her face toward the light. "Pause," Laura whispered. John fumbled for the remote and froze the frame. Ethan stepped closer until his reflection ghosted over his sister's face. "That's Scar," he said, tapping the glass. "Left eyebrow. She hit the porch rail when we were 8. He met his mother's eyes. No one argued. The documentary cut to a ranger interview. In the lower third, Kruger National Park, southern section, the voice mentioned Sabi River and a marula stand scarred by lightning. Ethan's head snapped toward Laura. "Lightning," he said. "Sifo used to point those out." Before the credits, there was one throwaway shot, B-roll, the kind editors used to stitch scenes. All of it the sort of quiet that looks like nothing to most people. A fever tree, a fallen branch, a glint of metal. Ethan said, "Rewind." John scrubbed back. There, 2 seconds buried inside an hour of lions, a close-up of the girl's hand. Not posed, not waving, just hanging at her side. Dangling from her wrist by a strip of yellow fabric, faded frayed, was a lion pendant. The same cheap bronze coin Laura kept in a jewelry dish, like a grief she wouldn't put away. Laura covered her mouth. "It can't be—" Ethan was already moving. "The scratch," he said. "Flip it." In Denver, Laura ran to the bedroom, snatched the pendant from the dish, and brought it back, trembling. On its reverse, a crooked S had been etched years ago by someone impatient with dull metal. On the screen in that 2-second throwaway, the girl's thumb slid over the coin and, for the briefest instant, flashed the back. A crooked S winked like a match struck in wind. Ethan didn't sit again. He sent the time code to John's email, then to Sifo's WhatsApp, the number they hadn't used in years, saved just in case. "Look behind the marula," he typed, fingers flying. "Lightning scar. Pendant. Fever tree near the Sabi Ford. Frame 52.17. He hit send, heart a hammer. At 3:11 a.m. "Denver time," Sifo replied with a single line. "I know that tree." By noon, the BBC had answered Laura's frantic message. The series producer connected them to Amara Patel, the episode's field director. Her voice through the laptop was calm and purposeful. "We never approach her," Amara explained. "Ethics protocols. We watched from distance, 800 meters, long lenses only. She stays mostly near one pride's boundary, never inside when adult males are present." Laura swallowed. "She's our daughter." The words were bare wire. They sparked when spoken. Amara's breath caught. "I thought as much," she said softly. There was a way she moved, watching, counting, like a researcher. Ethan leaned toward the webcam. "You shot a fever tree with a lightning scar near the Sabi Ford. Do you have the exact coordinates?" "We keep location metadata sealed for anti-poaching safety," Amara said, "but I can hand them to Sandparks and the police. If rangers lead, I'll follow." Within 48 hours, the Bennetts were on a plane. The flight map crept over the Atlantic, like a needle dragging thread through hide. Laura didn't sleep. She watched the ocean turn to desert, the desert to a green tougher than any map could color. When they landed in Johannesburg, a park truck waited with Sifo inside. Older, but the same. Wrinkles deeper at the eyes. Hands still the color of earth. "You came?" he said, and Laura folded into him with a sob that made strangers look away. They drove east. The road to Skukuza tasted like dust and eucalyptus. At the ranger station, a small team briefed. Veterinary unit on standby, tranquilizer rifles if needed, a perimeter to prevent the pride from circling back. "No heroics," the chief said, eyeing Laura and John. "We do this clean." They left at dawn. Ethan rode in Sifo's backy, clinging to every corner as the tires bit washboard, and let go. "You still read tracks?" he asked. Sifo smiled without showing teeth. "I still read," he said, "and your sister taught me something I forgot. Look for what moves in crowds." They parked a kilometer from the fever tree. Everyone went quiet, as if sound itself might spook the past. Binoculars rose. Heat shimmered. Somewhere close, a lion snorted dust. Amara joined them with a camera she never raised. "I'm here as a witness, not a filmmaker," she said, "if that's all right." No one answered. Everyone agreed. They saw her before she saw them, a pale figure half crouched in tall grass, hair rope-matted, a strip of yellow cloth wrapping her wrist, the pendant dull in the morning light. She moved like an animal that hasn't forgotten humans but doesn't trust them. She paused, head cocked. Somewhere 3 lions lay in shade just beyond view. The vet team murmured on the radio, adult males 200 meters south, 2 lionesses at 150. "If we approach, we pull them with sound," the chief said. "Recorded calls create a corridor." Ethan's throat went dry. "Calls?" he asked. "Calf distress," the vet said. "Not to hunt, just to draw." She lifted a small speaker and waited for the signal. The first recording bled into the bush, a thin, high bleat that made Laura's skin pebble. In the distance, a lion lifted its head. Another stood. The pride's attention turned, slanting away like a school of fish wheeling. A path opened for seconds at a time, a seam in canvas. "Now," the chief said, "slow. Hands visible." They walked. At 30 meters, the girl saw them fully, her mouth parted. She didn't run. She didn't smile. She put her hand to her chest and tapped twice, slow, deliberate, as if counting something only she could see. Laura stopped. 6 years of grief surged to her throat and held there. "Sarah?" she said. It came out smaller than she'd meant, a whisper with a mother's name inside it. The girl's eyes flicked to Sifo, to Amara, to the vet team, then to Ethan. She stared, as if measuring him against a memory. His shoulders had broadened. He no longer drummed on tables to fill silence, but his eyes were the same river color. "Professor," he said stupidly, and then covered his face. The pendant knocked lightly against the girl's wristbone when she stepped forward. She reached into a pocket stitched from the hem of a torn shirt and pulled out something wrapped in leaf and grass. The disposable camera, scarred but whole. She extended it to Ethan. He took it as if taking a newborn. "Make them count," Sarah said. The voice was rusted from disuse, but it held. "I did." Behind them, a lion roared. A thunder that crashes through bone more than ear. The vet lifted her radio. "Males on the move. We need to go now." They turned as a unit, the corridor closing around them, the fever tree staring and not blinking. Sarah's steps were cautious at first, then quicker, then sure. The pendant struck her wrist with the same soft metronome as before. At the trucks, the first thing Laura did was wrap her daughter in a jacket that smelled of laundry, soap, and airports. The second was cry into her hair. John's hand shook so hard he fumbled the door latch twice. Sifo stood apart, hands on hips, eyes bright. Amara did not film. The vet team shifted their focus to the pride, counting heads, ensuring no one followed. "They tolerated her," the vet said under her breath, half to herself. "Not normal. But not impossible either. Not if they heard a sound they understood." Back at the station, a dark room waited like a time machine. Someone found chemicals. Someone else found a red bulb that turned the room into a heartbeat. Ethan cracked the camera with a screwdriver and fed the film onto a spool with hands steadier than he felt. Frame by frame, a life surfaced. The first photo, acacia thorns and a ribbon mid-fall. The second, a smear of sky. The third, a lion's shoulder blurred as if brushed by breath. The fourth, men's calves in torn pants, one with a blue enamel ring shaped like a raindrop. The fifth, claw prints layered over shoe scuffs. The sixth, the fever tree, lightning scar puckered like a frown. The seventh, a close-up of the pendant, the crooked S, bright with reflected sun. In the last frame, Sarah's feet, dirty, small, stood next to a message scratched into packed soil, with a twig, "Count everything." Underneath, 3 short lines and 1 long, the tally marks of days. Ethan swallowed. "She left us a way to read it," he said. She always did. The police took copies of the men's legs and the blue ring. A camp mechanic had worn one like it. He hadn't shown up for work the week Sarah disappeared. The old rumor about poachers using camp gossip to plan opportunistic grabs rose like a snake and was beaten with sticks of procedure. An investigation spun up like a flywheel, finally with weight to turn. But the biggest revelation wasn't who took Sarah. It was how she'd survived. "Not with them," Laura whispered, staring at the film. "With them," she corrected, looking past the images to the bush outside. And because of them. Sarah slept that night not in a hospital, but in a small room at the ranger station, a cot squeaking every time she turned. Laura dozed upright in a chair, hand inside the jacket to touch her daughter's back when doubt tried to lie. John sat in the doorway, head bowed, protecting silence like a duty. At 2:13 a.m., Sarah woke, eyes wide, breath thin. "The calls," she whispered to Ethan, who had taken the floor. "You pulled them away. You made a path." Ethan nodded. "Sifo taught me to read crowds," he said, "and you taught me to notice." Sarah exhaled. "Make them count," she said again. And it wasn't about photos anymore. Morning brought a light that made everything feel possible and fragile at the same time. Coffee steamed in paper cups. Radios murmured like low surf. Through the open door, the smell of dust and sun-warmed rubber drifted in. A social worker from Nelsprut arrived with questions Sarah didn't have to answer. A doctor checked vitals and bite scars from bush insects, shook her head at the absence of worse. "She's underweight," the doctor said gently, "but strong," as if that word were a diagnosis. Reporters' emails vibrated in some distant inbox. Amara stood at the corridor's end, like a line drawn to separate the hungry world from this small room. "We won't release anything," she told Laura. "Not a frame, not a coordinate, not a name. Her story belongs to her." Laura nodded, eyes full. "Thank you for finding her," she said. Amara looked down. "She found herself," she corrected. "We were just there to notice." In the quiet that followed, the family learned how to talk again without breaking. Conversation came in small, careful parcels. "How did you stay?" Ethan asked finally. The question was a rock he'd carried 6 years. He set it down with both hands. Sarah's eyes went somewhere past the wall. "I didn't at first," she said, "not in one piece. I hid in the cool hours and followed shade in the hot ones. I learned which birds told on you and which kept your secrets. I learned which trees carried water deeper. I chewed on the white pith of fever trees when my mouth felt like ash. When lions were near, I didn't run. Running is for prey." Laura pressed her lips together until they whitened. "And the men?" "They came back once," Sarah said, voice flattening. "He had a blue ring. I watched from the thorn. The lions were closer to me than to them. The men left." She looked at her mother, then at the pendant. "They smell fear," she said simply. "I learned to smell it too." John cleared his throat. "I want to say I'm sorry," he began, and stopped because the words were too small for what they needed to carry. He tried again. I don't know. I should have done more." "You did," Sarah said. "You came back." She surprised herself with how true it felt. Forgiveness wasn't a switch, it was a path. Even lions needed corridors. Later, an officer entered with a small evidence bag. Inside, a blue enamel ring, recovered from a shack near the park's western fence, along with tools and radio frequencies scratched into cardboard. "Your film started this," he told Ethan. "We'll take it the rest of the way." Ethan nodded and looked at his sister. "You started it," he said. "You made the map." When Sarah stepped outside for the first time, without flinching at open space, a flock of starlings tilted overhead and braided into the sky. She watched them fold and unfold and smiled a little. "You don't always look for big tracks," she murmured, almost to herself. Sometimes you look for what moves in crowds. They flew to Denver 3 days later. The plane's cabin light flattened everyone into the same tired, hopeful shade. Laura kept her hand on Sarah's wrist the entire flight, thumb resting over faded yellow. John watched clouds the way a man watches a horizon he thought he'd lost. Ethan sorted the developed photos into sleeves as if they were relics. At home, winter air bit clean. Neighbors came with quiet casseroles and loud relief. The porch rail scar was still there, small as a comma. "We never fixed it," John said. "Couldn't." Sarah touched it and laughed through her nose. "Good," she said. "It remembers me." Upstairs, her room was a time capsule. The spiral notebook lay open where she'd left it, last word unhurried underlined twice. She wrote another word beside it with a hand steadier than she felt. Home. The first night, sleep was a series of false starts. At 3 a.m., Sarah paced the hallway, counting doorways because counting kept you alive. Laura woke and joined her wordlessly, steps soft on wood, the house whispering with heat. "Anywhere," Laura said when they paused by the window. "Any amount of time." The line was a bridge they both crossed. 2 days after, they met with a therapist who specialized in wilderness survival and long-term missing children. The therapist didn't ask for the exact shape of the terror. She asked for the shape of the courage that answered it. "Tell me about a moment you chose to live," she said. Sarah talked about a fever tree's pith and a ribbon tied tighter around a wrist to remind a heart to keep beating when the bush went still. Amara sent a private link to the documentary cut that would never air. In it, she'd spliced a final silent shot of the fever tree and held it long enough for anyone paying attention to see the scratched tally marks at its base, 3 short, 1 long, echoed months later in a Denver notebook, echoed again in the rhythm of 4 people learning to speak in complete sentences. Ethan started carrying a camera, not the heavy kind, just a slim thing he could lift without thinking. He took photos of ordinary things because ordinary things had turned out to be the most extraordinary of all. He took one of Sarah's pendant lying in her palm like an old coin you finally understand. "It never belonged to the men," he said. "It belongs to the story." On a Sunday, Sifo called from South Africa. His voice came through with a hiss of distance. "We found where the men camped," he said. "They won't try again. The bush keeps secrets, but it also keeps receipts." Laura laughed, a sound with light in it. "Come visit," she said. "We owe you every thank you we have." "One day," Sifo said. "For now, tell Sarah I still read." Sarah took the phone. "I still count," she said. "I still notice." In the quiet after, the family stood in the kitchen where the late sun turned everything honey-colored. John reached for the coffee tin and knocked a spoon to the floor. It rang against tile like a small bell. Everyone jumped and then laughed, breathless at how normal fear still felt. "Professor," Ethan said, testing a name they'd both grown into. "Captain," Sarah answered, and looked out the window at the cottonwoods bare as bone and thought that even trees keep time with scars. When the first spring rain came, it sounded different on the Denver roof, closer, as if the house stood under a larger sky. Sarah opened her window and breathed the wet metal smell that always followed long cold. On the desk, the pendant lay beside the developed strip of film like punctuation marks that had finally found the right sentence. They held a small gathering in the living room, just family and 2 friends who had watched the Bennetts learn to stand up after each year pushed them down. No speeches, no cameras. They played the documentary one last time. The private cut Amara had sent on a link that expired after 24 hours. When the fever tree filled the screen, Laura reached for John's hand and didn't let go. Ethan watched his sister watch herself and saw the precise moment she forgave the part of her that survived by becoming quiet. Survival is loud to the one doing it. It only looks silent from a distance. After the credits, the room held its breath. Then life exhaled and moved again. Someone refilled cups, someone laughed at nothing, someone knocked a knee on the coffee table, and apologized to furniture as if it could bruise. Ordinary things. Extraordinary now. Upstairs, Sarah opened her notebook to the last page. She wrote 3 lines and 1 long, then crossed them out and wrote something else. Count everything, make it count. On the nightstand, the disposable camera's empty shell sat like a husk, a thing that had done its job and could rest. She thought of Sifo teaching her to read lines in dust, of Amara choosing not to take a shot because the most ethical frame is sometimes none. She thought of Ethan in a dark room red as a heartbeat, coaxing pictures out of darkness. She thought of the lions, not as magic, as animals doing what animals sometimes do: read sound, follow pattern, respond to something infant deep inside their species. A child's cry is a design older than fences. You don't have to believe in miracles to believe in design. In Kruger, the fever tree would be leafing out, its bark a color you could only name if you'd seen it yourself. Somewhere near the Sabi, 3 lions would be sleeping through noon as they always had, their chests rising and falling with a rhythm that had once kept time with hers. She didn't belong to them, and they didn't belong to her, but for a while their lives had overlapped, like 2 exposures on a single frame, each image making the other mean more. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Sandpark stamped with a crest that looked official enough to steady any hand. The investigation had led to arrests. The blue ring had found its owner. There would be hearings and paperwork and things that felt like closure if you squinted. Justice never moved as fast as grief, but it moved. On a soft evening, Laura found Sarah on the porch steps, photographing nothing obvious, the way shadows from the rail cut the light into bars, the spark, when a car turned the corner and its headlights brushed the curb, the dust that lifted when a breeze found a seam in the street. "What are you taking pictures of?" Laura asked. "What looks back," Sarah said. Laura sat beside her and didn't fill the air. After a while she said, "If you ever get lost again—" "I know," Sarah answered, smiling with more teeth than she'd shown in years. "Anywhere, any amount of time." At bedtime, Ethan taped one of Sarah's photos to the refrigerator, the pendant in her palm, the scratched S, catching a sliver of sun. Under it he scribbled, "We all read, we all notice." It wasn't art. It was a map. That night a thunderhead rolled across the Front Range and broke open, rain braided on the windows. The house listened. Sarah closed her eyes and counted the space between rumbles. 1, 2, 3, long, tally marks in the dark. A door clicked down the hall. Someone turned, boards answering with old wood sounds. Somewhere inside every noise was the line of a story. You just had to decide which ones mattered. In her sleep the bush rose in soft veils again and laid itself down. A path curved to shade and back into light. The wind combed the world and then set it back as it had found it. A ribbon lifted and fell. Somewhere beyond the bend, a camera shutter clicked once, and the morning held still long enough to remember.